Well, happy Father's Day. I am so glad that you are here and for this sermon in particular because, there is a lot of hurt and brokenness in society around families. And Jesus's text that we're going to focus on for the Sermon on the Mount is so applicable for us, especially on a Father's Day. And I want to say I also just am so excited about what we're able to do that some of you might not realize right now. We're able to unite our military families around the globe, some who are here, some who are deployed because of our online ministry. So thank you for joining us in. Thank you for some of the college families that we're able to unite as a student is here and family maybe out in another state, another part of the country. And so the broadness of our audience on Sunday morning of bringing it down into a small family fit is just pretty amazing to me. Well, as we talk here, I want to challenge the men. There's going to be application for men, women. There's going to be for those who are dads and not dads. But on Father's Day specifically, I want to hone in a little bit and just say, guys, this world is going to tell you what it means to be successful. And it's going to be about, climbing the ladder. It's about making money. It's about getting titles on the wall, getting degrees completed. It's going to be about building a name for yourself. And none of that stuff in and of itself is bad. But here's the thing. Every achievement of this world is going to be around your physical or intellectual ability, about business, about finance. And if at the end of your life, you have broken relationships and broken trust, none of that matters. Now, those aren't bad things. But first matter, foundational is your relationships matter and your word matters, being a trustworthy person. And that's what Jesus focuses in on this portion of the Sermon on the Mount. Well, we are 5 weeks into this series now on Sermon on the Mount, and it's a whole nother way of thinking. Here's the thing that I have just been blown away as we have gone through this. See, each time we're like, whoa, Jesus said what? Oh, Jesus said what? The reason that he is so shocking here and that we might not get is that God's way and the world's way are way different. And when you bring them together and they face off, you go, whoa, wait a second. What do I do about it? Well, how do I? And there is a tension that occurs. Now, it's easy just to say, I'm going to check out then. I don't really like that. That makes me uncomfortable. I'll just kind of wait till next week. Maybe he'll do a feel-good sermon. Please press into the uncomfortable. See, as you press into God's truth and you allow that discomfort to settle for a little bit, he begins to work in you and work in me and help us to become what we never could have been left to the way of this world. Jesus uses some stuff in here called hyperbole, crazy statements that are like, whoa, what does he mean by that? And if not cautious, we take it at surface level and we don't go for the heart and we don't get the deeper meaning of the metaphor that he's given. He uses humor. He says some crazy stuff. Last week, Chris was talking about lust and anger, and Jesus says if your eye causes you to lust, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. Well, first of all, a hand can't really make you stumble. That's a foot. And if you do pluck out one eye, you still have the other eye to see with. You can still, in fact, you could lust and be blind. So that's not going to fix the problem. That's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, do whatever it takes to deal with this stuff in your life that's serious. And so when we get to a subject like today, we hear one that could be a tender subject for some of us, and then we listen to it at a surface value, and then we don't take it down into the depth of what he's trying to say, and then we miss the whole point. So listen for the heart of God as we go through this. The bottom line of the context that I want you to miss, the context of this passage is one of reconciliation. In fact, that's the story of the Bible. It's being reconciled to God and being reconciled to one another, because left to ourselves, We will divide left to ourselves. We will have all kinds of problems left to ourselves. We're not united with God. We don't come out of the womb just, praising God, saying, hey, I'm here. No, we come out selfish, screaming, kicking, and then we continue that way until God gets a hold of our heart, and even then, we still have to fight it. See, we're selfish at nature. I'm not saying you're just horrible, evil people. I'm just saying we all are messy. There's not one person in here who is easy to live with. We're all a little weird in our own way. We're all a little odd in our own way. We all are messy in our own way. And it's only in that picture that we can start to see, how can I be with another person in a healthy manner? When you have that kind of humility. Well, the topic of what I want to talk about is when that goes wrong and there's a brokenness, and it's called divorce. Divorce has impacted every person in this room beyond what you could even fathom just a few years back. And the amount of people who've been impacted and hurt and changed by this is just, it's dramatic. You have a friend or you have a family member or you personally have been through it, whether it's you as a child and your parents, or whether it's you as the adult and you've been rejected, or whether you made the choice yourself. And I want to make real clear today that I'm not here to put salt into your wound. I'm so sorry for the hurt that you've experienced. I'm so sorry for the pain that has already been caused. The focus of the passage today could open a wound for you, but I want to ask you, don't take it at the surface level. Let's go a little bit deeper and say, what is he really focusing on? And you'll find that this spirit of reconciliation, of hope, of forgiveness, of healing, of lifting up God's plan is the real focus always of Jesus. See, it's so vital to understand Jesus calls his followers to faithfulness. This world is broken and it's unfaithful. And left to ourselves, we are all unfaithful. That's the way of the world. Jesus is the faithful of all faith. He's the God who walks through the valley with us. He's the God who deals with us in our mess. He's the God who's forgiven us when we seem so unforgivable. He's the God who touches the hurting. He's the God who touches the untouchable. He's the God who loves the unlovable. And so, as he calls us to be like him, could I just ask you to remember that kind of picture of who our God is as I read this, because that's the God who states the following. Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 through 37. You've heard it say that the law says a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice of divorce. But I say that a man who divorces his wife, unless she's been unfaithful, causes her to commit adultery. Let me just stop for a moment right here, because there's a confusion sometimes that people are like, wait a second, why is he only talking about the man? It was basically unheard of, unthought of at this time, because of the value of a woman was so low. She was almost like property, unfortunately. It was very sad. A woman basically did not leave a man, but a man would talk about leaving a wife, and what would happen? He'd leave her in a horrible strait that often the only route to survive, you get the picture, would end up occurring. And it's really sad, so just hold with me. This has application today to how a man for a woman and a woman for a man. It's a both-way street here. So it causes her to commit adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. You have also heard that our ancestors were told, you must not break your vow. This is so important. It's coming right after talking about marriage, and we're going to talk about what came before the discussion on marriage as well. All of this goes together. It's one sermon. See, sometimes we want to separate it. So he talks about what kind of vow, or is it something that you hold, or are you a person who's trustworthy? You must not break your vows. You must carry out the vows you make to the Lord. But I say, he says something crazy. Don't make any vows. I'll get to what he's saying. He says, do not say by heaven, because heaven is God's throne. Do not say by earth, because the earth is his footstool. Do not say by Jerusalem, for Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Do not say by my head, for you can't turn one hair white or black. Just simply say, yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. What he's talking about here on this whole vow section and being a person who is trustworthy is basically contracts are not to help you keep your word, it's to help you get out of your word more often than not in today's society. And that was kind of how the vows would work. If they said by this, if I swear by this, then I might keep my word. But if you say by this, it might not. And he's just making fun of the sadness of culture at that point of when are you going to keep your word? You'd also be just a trustworthy person. And that comes after the most important vow you'll ever make, which is I take you to be my spouse, to have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse. That vow of saying I take you above none, no one else is going to get in the way. But here's the thing. The religious leaders of the day, you know what they argued more about and talked more about and had schools of thought on more? It wasn't on how to save marriages, how to make them healthier, how to make them better, how to get into God's view of things, how to treat people as God would have you. Hey, the whole thing that they'd have whole schools of thought on, it was arguing about the grounds for divorce and exceptions. There were two big leaders at the time. One was Rabbi Shammai. Now, Rabbi Shammai and his taught all of his followers and those who were going to be the religious leaders, he would argue with Rabbi Hillel's whole argument. Their school, they were very different because he said only for marital unfaithfulness, that's the only reason you could ever end a marriage. Now, Hillel on the other side basically taught it was for any and every reason. So basically, at that point, if your wife made breakfast and she burned it, you didn't like the toast, whatever it be, boom, out. Literally, that kind of excuse. Now, you might get stuck on the difference in the two. You know what I'm stuck on is the focus of Jesus versus the focus of the religious leaders. They want to know, where's the line I can walk up to? Where's the line that I can get rid of her? Where's the line? What are the grounds that I have? The focus is in the wrong place. And Jesus has a whole nother focus. God always, he has a life that he has called us to. And that is so important. See, rather than reconciliation of the home, Jesus is preaching a sermon on a life that God calls, a whole nother way of living. He has the Beatitudes where he says, blessed are those who are poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, blessed are those who are merciful, blessed are those who are pure, blessed are those who are persecuted. And that's the kind of person he says is going to follow Christ, and that's what it looks like before he gets to marriage. It's not, where's my rights and when do I get it? When do I get it? No. That's the Spirit. And then he goes into talking about anger and he says, hey, if you have a bitterness in your heart basically and you're angry at somebody else, leave worship and go fix that. Go try and be a person. Don't allow bitterness to control your heart. Don't let anger take over. He then talks about lust and he says, be a person who has eyes for one, your spouse. That's it. Don't allow lust to consume and eat you up. And then he talks about divorce and marriage, saying don't let anything separate you. And we're going to go deeper into that. And then he says be a person who is trustworthy. That's a life that becomes very attractive, that is following God's way, not the world's. Now, does divorce happen? Yes. Tragic things happen in this world. I know that some of you have been through things that I cannot even fathom. And I want to say again, I'm sorry for that. That's not the focus of where I want to go today as the primary focus. There are situations beyond what I can understand. And my primary focus is to try and describe for you a life that God calls us to. And remember that this is a metaphor where he wants you to grab hold of the deeper meaning. So to seek a full understanding of what God is saying is what I want to challenge you to. Let me just press in a little bit as to what it doesn't mean, and then we'll focus on the main point. Mark Moore says, the master's words are clear. Don't get divorced. I think we all agree with that. He says that's the idea of God is saying. But what we do after someone's already divorced, that's a difficult question. You see, nearly every biblical teaching on divorce is prescriptive. An example, don't do it. We have very few guidelines to go on after the fact. It is our arduous task to balance biblical standards, his holiness, his righteousness, his purity, with gracious reconciliation. Jesus is trying to explain the depth of the perpetual brokenness that comes from whether it be adultery, or the perpetual brokenness that comes from a marriage ending, the divorce that is horrible. He's not saying someone is perpetually an adulteress where they have somehow committed the unforgivable sin now and they are forever separated from the rest of society. He's not doing that. So if you have been felt to the point that you've been judged and kind of ostracized, I'm so sorry. If you've been through this, I want to challenge you to understand, to listen for his heart. He is recognizing how deep the scars go. He is trying to raise the level of importance of lifting up relationships. So this isn't the salt of condemnation at this point. This is not trying to dig down into your already festering wound. This is a matter of trying to lift up God's call for holy relationships. Fighting for, not just fighting against. The context here, once again, is that of reconciliation. That is a theme that God wants you to live outside of bitterness. If not careful, we will end up being consumed with our hurts, our habits, and our hang-ups, and then that bitterness takes root in our heart, and God doesn't want you to live in the midst of that. That's not what he's called you to. So I want to look a little bit deeper as he upholds relationships. What does this mean? What is he trying to accomplish? Well, you look at his words just a few chapters over in Matthew 19, and he actually goes a little bit deeper into giving an answer, and he challenges the thoughts of the religious leaders at the time. So in verse 3 of Matthew 19, some Pharisees came. They tried to trap him with a question. Should a man be, you see where they're coming from, which rabbi? Should a man be able to divorce his wife for just any reason? And I love Jesus' answer. Jesus doesn't answer. He gives a question to a question. And he's talking to the religious leaders who have huge portions of Scripture memorized and studied and argued and taught into their life for years and years. And he's like, dude, have you even read the Bible? I love this because he's like, that would be a very offensive question to them. They're like, well, of course we have. And they would want to list off all their credentials. And then Jesus replies, in the beginning, God made them what? Male and female. And then he continues. This explains why a man leaves, big important there, the past behind, leaves his own individuality, and then his father and mother, and is joined, that is united, with his wife, and the two are united into one, oneness being the goal. Since they are no longer two but one, let nothing split apart what God has joined together. Now there is some rich stuff in here. He has given us the prescriptive good side. Here's what you need to do. Here's how we need to move. Here's where we're aiming. Here's the goal. God's purpose is for one man, one woman, for as many days as God gives them life, to pursue, to love, to honor, to live together. That's the goal. And that's what he wants us to do. And so beyond that, there's this idea of leaving a past behind, and there's in some versions it says cleaving to. I love that. It's where you're choosing to attach to. It's not just, okay, now I have my partner and we're like roommates. No, it's just leave and cleave, that you're joining together and you're becoming one, and that nothing should come between there. So he goes back to when they want to just say, what's my out? Where's the line I can walk up to? What's my grounds to get rid of her? He's like, guys, you shouldn't have your focus there. Your heart ought to be on what is God's plan? What is his design? What is his target? Do marriages end? Yes, there are terrible things that happen in this world, but let's keep our focus on the design, the goal, the life, rather than the exception, because here's what happens. If you focus only on the exception, what becomes the norm? The exception. It's what you hold up is what you tend to become. What you lift up is where you put your values. What you think about and what you're talking about is where your heart goes. And he's like, quit just focusing on how can you get out? What's the line? He's like, let's lift up God's plan. Now, let's talk a little bit about God's plan, which if you want to study more, you read through Ephesians chapter 5, 1 Corinthians 13, two passages that you just can't get much better than. And that's what I'm really going to be giving you some application for today. See, the Bible defines love as a choice. Do you hear me on that? Love is a choice. How does this world define love? It almost always comes back to the warm fuzzies and feelings, and those come and go. There are times with my wife that she doesn't have warm fuzzy feelings towards me. There are times that she has some, and that's just life. If you base it on feeling, you're going to be cutting and running all the time. And so what he's saying is that here's what the picture of love is that you see in 1 Corinthians 13, that you see in Ephesians chapter 5, that it's a decision that you make where you decide to say, this is sacred, it is holy, it is a beautiful thing. I'm going to nurture, I'm going to cherish, I'm going to edify, I'm going to protect my spouse. That's the picture. And then it's done through commitment, where it starts in the head and then goes into your heart, and then it always goes into action. Love is an action. And then guess what? When you've made the decision, when you've made a commitment, when you put love into action, you know what comes out of that? Oh, the nice warm fuzzies do come. But if you wait until you feel it to do it, you're never going to get there. I don't know if you've had kids or grandkids or somebody else has. How many of you just are going to go, oh, I'm just waiting for the warm fuzzies to decide who is going to go change the blowout diaper? That never, I'm telling you, I'll never have warm fuzzies about that. And there is going to be a blowout diaper in your relationship sooner or later. And there's going to be a lot of them. That's a part of raising children. It's a part of being married. It's just the way of life. And if you have love as a feeling, you're going to get in a mess. So that's the kind of the first idea, because most of us don't want to admit how immature our love is. Let me put up a meter here for you just to kind of see. Can you imagine having a level meter in your life? I mean, that would kind of show you, just kind of, are you selfish or are you godly? And basically, see, we all are selfish to begin. I would hate for you to see my level meter. Oh, he's faking it right now. He doesn't like that person at all. Oh, cover it up. And but honestly, when you get married, when you're first in relationships, we are selfish by nature. I am, you are, we all are. It's just human nature. And then as you spend time together, as you develop some memories and you go through life together, you've accomplished some things, then you start to develop some sentimental, I remember, and hopefully you have more, and then it develops a little deeper. And then you really, as you start to get married, you go, oh, wait a second, I really ought to put action to this, and you learn to serve the other person and put them before you. But love that is God love is sacrificial. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. That's a love that is deep, where it is sacrificial. See, we're called to love our spouse as Christ loved the church, to give your life for, guys. And unfortunately, we give our life too often, for a job, for our hobbies, for our name, for money, for something that really doesn't matter at the end of the day. There's not anything wrong with giving a little bit over to some of that, but what you lay your life down for, that's a love that ought to start at home, and it ought to be with your spouse, and only second to God. And then your kids after your spouse. That's a picture of love that God has called us to. See, what does Jesus rant about basically right after this? He's talking about divorce, and then what does he rant on? It's being a person of your word. I want to challenge you to understand the depth of what is you're called to do, that you don't enter into just saying, how can I get out of this? What Jesus just says, are you trustworthy? See, if your relationships are broken and people don't trust you at the end of the life, that is a failure in my book. That's something I'm aiming for. See, if there's one vow that I really want to make sure that I'm trusted and kept, it's the vow I made 30 years ago. But when I made it 30 years ago, we stood in this little church down in kind of the center of McPherson, Kansas, before several hundred guests, friends, and family. And we said some things that we were clueless about. I was bawling like a baby. Marcy was looking at me, what is wrong with her? I'm sobbing, wiping my face, and neither of us had any idea the valleys that we were going to go through, the hurts that we would cause. Yes, we've had a lot of joy and a lot of good too. The only way we've developed the trust that we have today is time through valleys and mountains. Valleys and mountains. It doesn't happen outside of that. Trust isn't something that you can just decide to have. It's showing up day after day. It's loving when the person's unlovable. So we decided here, just as I shared, I was getting ready to take her on a cruise for our 30th. It was something I'd never done before. I was hoping I wouldn't go stir crazy. I didn't jump off the boat. I had a great time. But 4 days into that, we just spent time alone and just enjoyed one another for 4 days. We recommitted our vows. And I'll just put up a little scene of this. I'm not going to let you hear the words because that's between her and me, not you. But as you just see what we did, we found a place on the boat, had very few people. And we prayed together. And then I gave my vow. That was through the picture and the understanding of I take you with every scar that has happened over the last 30 years. Every mountaintop that we've celebrated. That is a love that can only happen over time. I love her more today than I ever did at that beginning because it takes time. And she hasn't left me. I haven't left her. We're in. We don't focus on where's the grounds for getting out. Where's the line that I can push to? We just say, we're in. Like it or lump it. Let's work on this. And then she shared with her vow, and I could hardly, it was so beautiful to me because I knew without a doubt, she showed me for 30 years that this vow was meant. And so I'll be honest, the vow, it was just the two of us, meant way more than the vow that I took in front of hundreds of guests, friends, and family. Because I know now there's no doubt, and she knows no doubt we're in. I don't know where you are in your relational journey of life, but I do know this, that you can take one step further to wherever God is calling you. You may get married, you may not be married. You may have been married for years. You may be in the pregnant phase. Is like my daughter who's been married for a couple of years now. She has a belly out here. She's ready to pop, and it's so fun as they're so excited. I've seen their love grow, and she's in the, I have a life I'm responsible for phase that she's real nervous about. You might be in that whole kid phase where they're running all over, and you're like, whatever, they'll survive. They bounce. And it might be in that time when you're where I am, where we're empty nesters, and we're like, we get to spend time together again. And it's so fun. And to maybe that grandparent stage, you might be in retirement stage going, Barry, you don't have a clue yet. And that's okay. Whatever stage you're in, I don't know how much pain you have underneath your bridge. But I do know that God, who's not done yet, I know the God who says that when you think you're ready to just throw in the towel and you can't handle it anymore, he's like, oh, now let me do my thing. If you'll let him work in there, if you'll let him show you, if you'll let him, the next step is going to be different for each of you. Some of you need to learn what it means to just be a man or a woman of your word. Some of you need to get some mentoring. Some need to go to counseling. Some need to just turn, and possibly today, you need to just say, I love you, because you haven't said it in a while. Some of you just need to turn and say, hey, I haven't told you in a while, I'm proud of you, because you stopped saying that a long time ago, and all you've said is what's wrong. Others need to just say, hey, I'm sorry. Whatever your next step is, just say, here I am. God, I want to live a life of faithfulness. so that at the end of my life, I'm not controlled by bitterness and brokenness, but I've lived a life of reconciliation, and I've done everything I can to be a man or a woman who is trustworthy as I lay my life down to you. That's the life he's called you to. It's hard, and it's worth it. God, I thank you so much. I thank you for loving me in spite of me, and I thank you for giving hope to the hopeless. I thank you for touching the untouchable. And God, I know that there are many listening right now that are just hurting and they're not sure what to do next, and they just need your healing hand to reach down in your Holy Spirit to flow in them again, to lift their head, to see the light, to have some hope in the midst of their despair, and just to say, okay, God, I'll give you this minute, maybe this hour, and then they can learn to give you a day and then a week and then more as you begin to rewrite their story. God, for those who've already been hurt and been rejected and felt the burn of that, oh God, I pray that you would help them to know their worth and their value beyond what any person of this world says, and that you write the rest of their journey. For those who need to just apologize or change of heart, I ask that you do heart work on them. Oh Lord, we need you. You are the God of the breakthrough when I'm breaking down. You are good all the way through. We